Why on earth did I cover my entire garden with hay? And how does that benefit my soil? But better yet, how does that benefit me? Well, if you hang out with me for a little bit, I'll answer all those questions for you. Welcome, y'all. My name's Loanna, and this is Little Bit of Homestead.
And here's a quick look of the 3 gardens that we've been building up gradually over the years.
Gardening has become way more than just a hobby that I love. It has become really important to me that I know where our food comes from and how it's grown. But lately, doing what I love has become harder and harder on my body because I ain't getting any younger. So, over the past few years, we've been working really hard to get systems in place so that the garden is working harder for us than we're working for the garden. So, before I share with you how deep mulch gardening affects me physically, I want to show you how covering your entire garden with a thick layer of mulch benefits the garden. Did you know that the soil itself is full of life, or at least it's supposed to be? So, for instance, have you ever been in the woods or a wooded area and you notice that the ground beneath is almost always kind of moist, and then when you walk on it, it's a little squishy? That's because it's a constant mulching every season. The leaves fall, twigs fall, they decompose. It mulches its ground itself, and it's its own little compost making system, nature's way. And it stays real moist on the wooded soil, and there's all kinds of microorganisms, fungi. Yes, there are good fungi, worms, and they get in there and do what the microorganisms and worms do, and it's continually making nice, healthy soil. Man doesn't have to come in there and do anything to make things regrow. It just knows what to do. So after I learned about this, and it took me a while to really wrap my head around it because we've already learned what we've learned, and sometimes it's hard to unlearn it. So by keeping our garden soil covered with mulch, we're maintaining moisture for a longer period of time, and that keeps all the microorganisms and worms closer to the surface, and they're doing what they do, and they're loosening the soil. And then the hay decomposes over time, and that's feeding the soil, and that feeds the microorganisms, so they get in there and do what they do. They basically eat each other, and they poo, which in turn is making fertilizer and pulling all the minerals and nutrients into the soil where the roots can absorb it and take it up into the leaves and into the plant. So you have a natural fertilizer, and it's just doing what the soil was made to do. So I have geeked out on all the info about soil life, but there are people that explain it better than me. So I will link the videos that I found helpful to learn about soil life if that's something you're interested in. Oh, and the deep mulch protects the soil from the wind, the rain, and the sunlight, so you have less erosion. So essentially, free soil. And the mulch also protects from sunlight so that the weeds, any weeds in the soil, can't photosynthesize, so it makes it harder and harder for them to grow, so less weeds. That's one of my favorite things. So the deep mulching saves a lot of money. I'm not spending as much on the water bill. I'm not having to buy fertilizer. And for my mulching material, if I can resource it for free or cheap, that's a win-win. Now time, that's my big saver and my favorite. I'm not spending as much time watering. I'm not having to go out and buy fertilizer, and I'm not having to apply the fertilizer. And number one, I'm not pulling as many weeds. So for instance, in this garden, it made sense to me to just always do what I always did. I had gardened for years. So I would add things to the soil. I would amend the soil. I would fertilize. I would loosen up the soil. I would mix amendments into the soil. And I was working really hard. But what I didn't realize is that I was causing the soil life to work hard as well, because just when it would get its soil habitat all comfy and working like it wanted to, I'd come in and add something, or I'd mix it up. So I didn't realize I was not only working hard myself, but I was making the soil life to work even harder. And then I realized when I quit doing all these things, I was allowing the soil life to do what it does and work for me. And also, I guess in a way, I liked the idea, especially in this garden, of the nice little rows. I liked my pathways mulched with wood chips, and I like to lightly mulch each row so that it kept a maintained, well-groomed look. I knew better, but I think I had convinced myself that it would be okay if I just lightly mulched everything. However, so my hands, my knees, and my hips decided that not pulling weeds all the time was much more beautiful than well manicured rows. And I also noticed that down here in the lower section where I consistently mulched deeply with especially leaves from our trees, there would be so much less weed pressure. And then when you would get down in the soil, it was just rich and dark and so many worms. It was a beautiful thing.
When you mulch your garden, you want to have it anywhere from 4 to 18 inches deep, and sometimes even deeper, just depending on your situation. But don't sweat it. It's so simple. If you see a weed, it's time for more mulch. As this mulch had settled down, I came in before I started seeing weeds, and I just tucked this around everything really good, even on the back side of those plants. And it didn't take long at all. And one of the ways that this is such a good method for me at this stage in life is I can do a little at a time. I garden on a pretty big scale, but you can apply this method at any size of a little garden. We have friends that just this spring popped in a little section right next to their walkway in their backyard, and they're already growing food. She just harvested some potatoes. I'll do a video real soon, and we'll talk about how you can resource your mulch, and we'll put in a little garden so you can see how easy it is. We're going to talk about the mulch real quick, and then we'll take a look at the newest garden that is a prime example of the deep mulch method. And we just started it several months ago, and we already have things growing in it. When I talk about mulch, I am not talking about the bags of mulch that you buy from the big box stores or what you go by the scoop from landscape companies. That is exactly what that is. That's for landscaping, and it is usually sprayed with something to help it from keep it from decomposing and also protect from insects like termites. And that may be great for around your house, but it is not good for in your garden. I'm actually talking about mulching the garden with organic matter. I'm talking about hay, straw, lawn clippings, leaves, even wood chips. I personally only use wood chips in my pathways, and I have reasons for that we'll talk about in another video. I am not poo-pooing against wood chips as a good mulch in your garden. They actually do work. They are just not the choice right for me. You can also use a combination of these different things. Just the best mulch is the mulch that you can get your hands on. Also, before you run out and just get any old hay or mulch, I want you to make sure that it is not been sprayed with any kind of herbicides or pesticides, especially the herbicides. Herbicides are basically a broadleaf weed killer, and a lot of times even people might spray their yards with that. So if you spray your lawn with that, or you are resourcing from a neighbor that sprays their lawn, do not use that on your garden. I'm not just trying to be a natural purist here. It is actually a problem that if it gets into your soil, it can wreak all kinds of havoc. It can actually cause your plants not to grow or them to grow deformed. I've actually had it happen to me. I will link some videos in the description if you want to go check that out if you've never heard of it, or if you're facing this problem, of some good people that have experienced it and what they did to try to alleviate the problems quicker. So December 24th, Christmas Eve, we came out into the field. We did not till. We just laid down a thick layer of cardboard, and we laid down the hay on top of the cardboard, pretty thick. It looked like a lot of hay, but it quickly settled down. And then a few months ago, I came back in and put another layer of that hay on it. And we pretty much did nothing that whole time. And we already have potatoes growing and some tomatoes growing. This is in May, and you can see that the grass is already decomposed, the cardboard is gone, and this red, hard clay soil is soft and usable. It's amazing. Now, I planted these tomatoes and I watered when I planted them, and then I watered one time since, so it has retained moisture really well, and we have been in such a dry time. I just did a full garden tour, and I show a better picture of this area and the rest of my garden. If you want to check that out, I'll link that at the end. And after that, we did nothing. I came in and I did a spring planting of some potatoes in the hay. I have some on that end and some here next to me. And a little while later, I planted some tomatoes. Now the goal is we're going to come in here with some winter squash and let that just go crazy. When I tell people that I'm going to use hay, they could not wrap their head around the idea that I was going to put hay on top of the garden. All I could hear them say is, you're going to get weeds. Weeds are going to come out of the hay. And I've seen a lot of people ask those same questions in comments on Deep Mulch gardening Facebook pages and such. All I can speak for is myself. And to be quite honest, I have not had a problem with weeds from the hay. And this hay that we're using now, I mean, you can see it gets these white fuzzies everywhere. I don't know if you can see them, but it gets these white fuzzies everywhere. So other than it being just a little annoying, I have not had a single weed sprout from it at all. Now in the past, I have used straw. Straw is one where you do tend to get weeds. However, when you put the straw out, it is just the leftover grains in the straw that are sprouting. Once you see the greens starting to sprout, if you go out and just rub your hands loosely through it before you allow the roots to get down and go into the soil, it won't be a problem. I promise it won't be a problem. However, I am not going to say that you will not get a weed problem from hay. I'm talking about my experience. I have used multiple sources for hay and straw in our area, and to this point I have not had a problem with weeds that came from the hay or straw. Same with when I mulch with my lawn clippings. I have not had a weed problem coming from my lawn clippings, but I am not going to say that it will not happen in different areas with different hay or weeds. So that's something you may want to look into for yourself. So I'm going to sit out here in the middle of the garden in the sun for you all and tell you about this nasty booger. This is called bindweed. It does not come, no, it's not bindweed. This is Bermuda grass. At least that's what we call it around here. It may be actually called something else, but this is all I've ever heard it called. Now, in all of my gardens, I do not have a problem with this. The only place I have a problem with this in my main garden is right at the edge of the back side of this fence, and it is next to what has been a hay field for years. And it seems to creep in continually from the fence, and I have to weed eat out there, and I do have to pull it, but it's gradually getting weaker and weaker. This is just going to continually be a problem. It is a problem because of the fields and the grass that has already existed here. And why is the mulch easier than, say, if we just tilled this garden traditionally? Well, when you till this, when you cut it or pull it up, every time you break it, it will root from every one you break off, okay? So if you come in and till and everything looks lush and brown and gorgeous, the soil seems soft and there's no weeds and they all look like they die off, well, you let a little bit of rain and the sun beat down on those little rhizomes, and next thing you know, each little piece of this is going to turn into multiple weeds. And basically, when you do that, you are just reproducing weeds. You're breeding weeds. So what makes the deep mulch different? Well, with the deep mulch, you are smothering out the weed, and the weed is going to have to work really hard and take all of its energy to get through the mulch to reach the sun, and it will. And then when it gets out and reaches the sun, you come out and pull it, and it pulls out much easier than you try to pull it out of hard, sun-beaten down, tilled soil. You're going to have to go back in with that and hoe and do all kinds of things, maybe rerun a tiller through it, and then you're just starting the process all over again. But with the deep mulch gardening, we're just going to put on more hay, straw, leaves, and you smother it out. We will gradually make it weaker and weaker, and except at the edges where we may have to weed eat and continue to work on that over the years, you will eventually win. You eventually win. The edges will probably always be a slight problem, but it's not going to be super labor intensive, and you watch, I will find a way to beat this booger. It's so simple. If you see a weed, it's time for more mulch. And that's one of the ways that we've been incorporating into making our garden process much easier at this stage of life. If gardening easier and better appeals to you, then check back with us and see what we've been doing in the garden and what we come up with next. My name's Loanna. This is Little Bit of Homestead, and I thank y'all for hanging out with me.